Hello, this is the Pensive Professor. Wanted to go over a presentation on the art of persuasion. Just a brief overview. Want to do a brief definition of terms. I came up with a triangle of persuasion, talk about some types of reasoning. I do have some references at the end. I also wanted to discuss Maslow's hierarchy of needs before that, and Monroe's motivated sequence. These are good things to note if you're trying to understand the basics of persuasive communication. Definition of terms. Rhetoric. This is a term that a lot of people use, but they don't really understand what it means. This is essentially the art of persuasive communication, written and or oral. Cicero and Aristotle, these are some of the founding fathers, or rather credited to be the founding fathers of rhetoric. Cicero was a Roman statesman who wrote on rhetoric thousands of years ago. Aristotle, Greek philosopher, who named or coined the term of ethos, pathos, and logos. We'll talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs shortly. He was an American psychologist in the 20th century. Kairos or Kairos is all about timing and or opportunity. Also, just to give you some background on the mythology of that, was the youngest child of Zeus and, not too much surprise, the god of opportunity. Logical fallacies. These are errors in reasoning. A slippery slope in the bandwagon are types of common logical fallacies. Slippery slope, this is where small things often lead to huge or devastating things. That's not always the case, so it's good to remember that. Bandwagon, the idea here is if many people believe it, it's true. Again, not always the case. A lot of times people use the term jumping on the bandwagon or get on the bandwagon. That's kind of where that reference came from. Demographics, data relating to a specific population. Open and closed-ended questions are good questions if you ever want to interview somebody for data. Open-ended questions typically have a long answer and often start with how or why. Closed-ended, your typical yes, no, short answer questions. Groupthink, this is where the group thinks for the individual, and individualism is really not well known in this case. Inductive and deductive reasoning, these are good things to study and review when it comes to learning about logic, especially persuasive logic. With inductive reasoning, this is typically where you have assumptions about things. You make broad generalizations from specific observations. Deductive reasoning, reflecting on one or more statements, premises, to reach a logically certain conclusion. Deductive reasoning is generally more certain. So, if you consider the triangle of persuasion, this is something I just kind of came up with because I don't think people really realize how important persuasive communication is. So, in my teaching, writing, teaching public speaking throughout all these years, I have come up with these ideas. People are selfish, we'll talk about that shortly, knowing your audience, and everyone encounters persuasive communication, so it's definitely essential. All right, if we take a look at some of the stuff going on right now, you can see that people are selfishly hoarding toilet paper. It's true. Naturally, with this hoarding mentality, people are thinking of themselves first. They're focused on their lives first, focused on their family first. The general mentality is what's in it for me. So when you try to persuade people, you have to be aware of the fact that people are generally self-centered. It's important to know your audience. To do that, you do have to consider your demographics. What is the culture? What is the age? What is the gender? What is the ethnicity? Try to determine what do they want. Also remember that persuasion influences everyone. Thousands of types of persuasive communication happens each day. We have to make choices. people try to get us to make certain choices, and if nothing was decided, nothing would work. So choices have to be made, whether people agree with them or not. But the whole idea of persuasive communication is to try to get people to agree. It is essential. It cannot be avoided. Reasoning. It's important to use types of reasoning to make choices. Critical thinking should be used often. This is a process where you gather, comprehend, analyze, and evaluate information to make a choice. Critical thinking is very important when you're trying to come up with a persuasive proposal, anything persuasive. You may not need to think critically in routine tasks. You may not need to think critically in emergencies. Brief rundown on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's good to understand the basics here. Maslow believed that we all had foundational needs, physiological needs. This includes air, water, food, shelter, sleep. After that, you could move up the pyramid. Consider your safety needs, personal security, employment, resources. Then there is the need to belong, to have love, friendship, family, intimacy. Esteem, that's the next level. Do you have respect for yourself and others? And finally, self-actualization. This is the desire to be the most you can be. Monroe's motivated sequence. There are about 5 steps here, and this is generally used if you're trying to convince others of a certain point. It's used in persuasive speaking more often. Your first step is the attention step. This is where you're trying to get people's attention. This can be used using a statistic, something of that nature. Can be used to, you can use a story, anything that helps you gain people's attention. Then the second step is you have a clear need or a problem. After you get everybody's attention, you can go on and show them that there is a problem that needs to be solved or some sort of a need. Then you satisfy that need. That's the third step. Satisfaction or solution. Visualization. You try to help others visualize what the world would be like if everybody followed your vision. And then there is the final step, which is the call to action. So that's today's presentation. These are some references, and hopefully you learned some new concepts regarding persuasion.